The idea of plate tectonics is fairly straightforward. It was proposed in 1910 by a man whose name was Alfred Wegener. He was a German meteorologist, which actually meant he studied weather. But he had a lot of passions, and one of the things he was trying to learn about was what the Earth might have looked like in the past. What's interesting about this is that prior to plate tectonics, the understanding was the static theory, which means that the way the Earth is today is the way that it's always been and the way that it's always going to be, where everything is located, continents, mountains, rivers, that's where they've always been. And simple calculations from observations that scientists were making were showing that that couldn't be the case. There were too many things that were showing that that had to be wrong. And that's where Alfred Wegener stepped in. So this plate movement, and he came up with this idea that the Earth's plates are moving. The crust is divided into these plates, and they move around. And these movements cause a lot of different things. They create land features to form, whether we're talking about mountains or various other things, trenches. And they also cause volcanoes and earthquakes. And it's crucial in the cycling of carbon on this planet. But the idea of plate tectonics combined Alfred Wegener's idea of continental drift with Harry Hess's idea of seafloor spreading. Continental drift, put together by Alfred Wegener, his first idea was that all the continents were together in one supercontinent called Pangaea. And Pangaea is a word that means all land. And since then, those pieces have been moving apart. Now, he gathered some evidence to support this, and what he found was similar fossils on different continents. So, for example, he might find a plant that exists in Antarctica, and that fossil is found on 4 different continents. Now, this plant is more likely to, is obviously not going to exist in Antarctica today because it's too cold. So how could it possibly be there unless they were once together? The other obvious ones are when we take into account some of these animals and how they couldn't jump off the coast of South America, swim across 2,000 or 3,000 miles of ocean, and end up in Africa. It's more likely that this animal walked across when the continents were connected. And so that was his first piece of evidence, was that the continents had to be together because of these fossils that he found. The next thing he looked at is if we take these continents and we push them together, especially talking about South America and Africa, it looks like they roughly fit together like puzzle pieces. Now, what Alfred Wegener couldn't see was the continental shelves, which are currently under the ocean water, and they fit together almost perfectly. So that was his second piece of evidence. And also along these same lines, rock layers that are found here in South America match up with rock layers that are found here in Africa as if they formed together and then they were split apart. And so that's his rock evidence. And the last one is his glacier evidence. And this basically is scratches in the rock layers showing where glaciers existed, and there were glaciers here, and they were moving in this direction. And that means they would have had to come from the ocean, which is not typically where glaciers come from. And the only way that would really work is if we take these continents and push them back together, then this would be the center, and they would be moving out in this direction to all these other continents if we had moved them back as one supercontinent in time. And so those were his 3 pieces of evidence supporting this. His problem was he couldn't explain how the continents move. And that's where this next gentleman came in, and his name is Harry Hess, and he talked about this concept of seafloor spreading. He worked in the Navy in World War II and took all these elevation readings of rocks on the ocean floor, and he came up with this idea that in the center of the ocean was this ridge where magma was rising to the surface. It was rising to the surface and then pushing the continents apart to make room for that new magma in here. This was his idea of seafloor spreading. So this was now showing how the continents could move. This was something that Alfred Wegener could not do. He also found evidence for this, and it was 2 things. Essentially, if we look at the center here at this spreading ridge, if this is where new material is forming, then if it's new here, then as we move away, it should be getting older. And they actually took rock samples of these rock layers that supported that idea that, yes, it does get older as it moves away. Also, in those rock samples, was iron, and the iron preserves itself in the direction that our magnetic field was pointing. So we have direction north here, and if this rock here and this rock here formed at the same time, then this should also have a northern magnetic direction. And then those should have been pushing other rocks out of the way that formed at a different point in time. So if we look at this rock and the one on the other side of the spreading ridge, then they should have the same magnetic direction, which indeed they do, which is south. And so this is the information that supported the idea that the continents were moving. So Harry Hess and Alfred Wegener had two different ideas which combined and eventually formed the theory of plate tectonics.